we can get feedback from the population to correct mistakes. That's the key functional virtue of democracy. Democracy doesn't work if we are elected and just tweet at the population and double down on mistakes because we haven't realized them from the ground. So the key virtue of people getting out there, on top of the energy that we commend in the exit strategy, is to correct mistakes of policy and administration. So in the entire political class, all summer must be traveling all over the country to all corners. I'm for that. The entire civil service, much of Ottawa is still operating on Zoom, is a scandalously low energy for the biggest country, second biggest country in the world. Out you go across the country, find out what's happening on the ground. You're not sufficiently clever, and nobody is, to make these in the abstract and to commend people what the good life is. Go and correct your mistakes.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News to bring you an update from Irvin Studin. I'd previously interviewed Studin a few months ago in March of this year regarding the national exit strategy that he has developed with others as a think tank initiative through what they've called the Canada Science and Policy Committee. The committee is comprised of doctors, scientists, and policy professionals who are focused on steering and choreographing Canada out of the pandemic and restoring strength in the 8 systems that they have identified as being in crisis. In this interview, I discuss with Mr. Studin what those systems are, how the steering and choreography has unfolded since the last time we chatted, and what the biggest hurdles continue to be while advising government and institutions alike who appear to remain out of touch in regards to what life is like on the ground with everyday Canadians. Check it out.
Thanks for having me back and your continued interest in this. If we go back to February, I outlined that the only way to properly exit our multiple catastrophes is to do so with great energy across the 8 systems crises. The 8 systems crises are COVID public health, non-COVID public health, the economy and business, education, national unity, institutions, the social fabric, and international. These are all crisis areas that were collapsed during the pandemic. So we have a lower equilibrium. And to get back to even 2019, 2020 levels, we need to raise the level. To get to where we need to be in a more difficult post-pandemic world, we need to raise the level earlier, even further. We cannot do that simply by removing mandates or removing masks. We're good, everything is back to normal. No, because then we confirm that lower level living that I'm talking about. So it's work, 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 energy, energy, energy across all the systems. It just so happens that in the 2 areas in which most people are interested on social media, the ones that we think are sufficient for exiting the pandemic, mandates or masking, we've done the laziest thing possible. The most self-evident, but the laziest. We remove mandates and we remove masks. But we never told anyone to stop imposing vaccination mandates in institutions, not just in air travel, but in summer camps, in sports, in different schools, in any social club. That continues. So there's wild west of vaccination across the country. I'm sure everyone will have encountered it, whether one is sympathetic or not unsympathetic. It is a social kink that really results in huge frictions that impede our ability to be productive economically, in national unity, and obviously in all these other systems areas. The same thing with the masking. We said no mask mandates, but we never told anyone to take the masks off. So we're stuck in this strange purgatory in which some people have taken them off and some people will never take them off. And some people are just confused. No one's told them to take them off or when to take them off. They just said masks are not required. But we forgot that the opposite of compulsory masking is saying masks off, please, because that's the equal opposite energy. We forced people and Canadians to mask, and then we said, you're good to go, right? That's like imprisoning someone for 2 or 3 years and saying now you're good to go, but we forgot to tell them they can leave the cage. And that's laziness, that's unthinking, and that is counterproductive for the high energy we need. We need people to be mask off, mandates to be removed, consistently unwound for us to have the energy across the systems. Otherwise, we confirm that low level living, and that's where we are across the system. So ours is to remind everyone it needs to be very deliberate, very choreographed, high energy across the systems.
And who are you looking to choreograph this? I mean, is it government officials? Is it public health? Or is it at the institutions? I mean, we've seen inept failures at all of those levels. So who are you looking to give the high energy that's needed to fully exit this pandemic pandemonium?
It's a great question. We are a central-led system in Canada. We are a leadership-led system. That's the nature of Canadian constitutionalism. It's different from American constitutionalism, where civil society is much more active in business. So we do rely, and that is the exit strategy relies not just on the goodwill of officials and political leaders and medical officials, but real thinking and energy. They must do the work. They are the ones who made the mistakes in collapsing a lot of the systems by not thinking systems wise. And they are the ones that need to unwind it. They cannot just go on Twitter and say masks are optional, your choice. It's a lot of applause, doesn't get us anywhere. Same thing with the mandates, same thing with education, by the way. They cannot say we're not closing schools anymore, back to normal, because they've collapsed the school system. Everything needs to be reconstituted. Lay citizens can participate in that and must be conscious of that, but they cannot do it. They don't run the institutions. They're not decision makers. So for all the decision makers, we feed the strategy to it. And I can confide in you, Tamara, as I have to other colleagues and in other interviews, that many of these decision makers, including public health officials, quietly feed into the plan. We say things that they cannot say, that are proper English, proper thinking. And we say, now go and do it. So it depends on the prime minister, all the premiers, all the deputy ministers, the cabinet ministers, and of course, medical health officers. High energy, high choreography. Do not sleep over the summer and do not glorify sleep. So we're updating a plan from February, and we'll update it again later in the fall.
Mm-hmm. It would be really great to start to see. I mean, we see lots of rhetoric still coming out of various liberal cabinet ministers and the prime minister himself. I mean, I'm running a campaign right now against the Tim Hortons camp for their imposition of the vaccine mandate for all youth age 12 and up. It does really seem like there is that lack of cohesion, which you note in your exit strategy, and it's always worrisome to me that it doesn't appear that people are listening, that the officials who are in charge of those sort of top-down orders to disseminate to the public and the population, that they're actually listening. Can you give us a sense of hope, or do you have any insider information to counteract what I've just said?
All I can say is I never work on the basis of hope. I only work on the basis of work. So it's work, work, work. We work with the officials, sometimes browbeating, sometimes as friends, sometimes as annoying adversaries, to bring them to the table to understand the work that's required beyond the tweet, beyond the Zoom call. A lot of this chaos is on the ground. So they, in many cases, don't even understand the chaos that's happening in the vaccination theater. You have the perverse chaos of, and I'll name the organization because I'm a soccer guy, and it's Toronto FC. They have a wonderful youth academy. I, in my youth, would have played in it, but they're requiring young men to vaccinate when vaccine mandates are now removed, when the vaccine is strictly moot. They're requiring them to vaccinate for the category that is most at risk of myocarditis on the public statistics of Ontario Public Health. So what is that? That is a social perversion that would have been unacceptable in 2019 Ontario. We cannot now deliver it with a smile and say, well, everyone agrees, it's the rule, it's for everyone's safety. This is all rubbish. This top level either doesn't understand it or is too lazy or cowardly to make that call to TFC, as they must have. Clubs across the country, schools, camps, all sorts of institutions, public and private alike, including companies, say, stop. Not because you're pro or anti-vaccination, but because the mandate is done. The vaccination is largely moot, as is stated clearly by Moore and Tam and other officials. And you have this perverse effect on these young males in particular of boxing them out of sport at a time of peak athletic capacity, or boxing them in such that they must assume a conspicuous risk in a very perverse way. Why would we do that to them? Simply to access a public good that would have been theirs on any good Canadian day. That's just mind-boggling, but we're not thinking it through. So in the exit strategy, we do the favor for the officials. We think it through the choreography, because they're all connected. And a lot of these knots, what we call knots of incoherence, need to be unwound at the ground level. It is as simple as a call to this camp, that camp, this school, say, stop, stop. Or at the individual level, masks off, masks off. You don't need to wear it in a car in the middle of nowhere, right? That is just a socially, in my view, humiliating situation which we've put the public through unthinking. It's not the public's fault. It's the leadership's fault, which has imposed the chaos and now must unwind because we are a leadership-led system.
Has the strategy entertained, for lack of a better word at all, legislation to be put in place to actually prevent vaccine mandates from going ahead further? Or, I know that you mentioned in your platform that the Section 22 order specifically should be washed away, and that we shouldn't give this authority to public health officials to arbitrarily impose these orders onto businesses or people. Would it be the same then in terms of imposing legislation to prevent institutions and camps and organizations from going above and beyond and doing their own arbitrary medical enforcement?
That could be done. That could be done, although legislation takes a long time and it is permanent. And we don't mean to be dogmatic about mandates in general. We just so happen that the mandates in this case were fomented social mania, and we vaccinated very differently from when we would have the way in which we would have when you and I were children. We vaccinated without even knowing with what we were vaccinated in, and it was just perfunctory. We went on about our day, but we imposed a mania on the population in the service of, in my view, interests that were not our own, and with social chaos on the ground, right? And limited social health outcomes in many cases. Some of them counterproductive. So to get out, some of it, there is some legislative language in there. Some of it, for instance, has to do with schools. More robust standards on compulsory schooling. Schooling is not optional in Canada. It never has been, but we didn't realize how non-compulsory it was until students started being ousted or defecting from education altogether. What? We talk about an international treaty on countries never closing schools, led by Canada, which is an important contribution, I think, to the global catastrophe in education. We do talk about Section 22 because it turns out that the public health officials are, with the greatest respect, they're good people, I'm sure, accidental leaders at a period of great historical consequence. They didn't even know they were charged with such responsibilities. So they have powers to close schools, to destroy sporting activities, to close businesses. These are way outside of their ken, and they are in the political realm. So it must be a political responsibility. And Section 22 has allowed for very decentralized interpretation of what should be just a centralized accountability for major decision making.
Now, I want to get back to something that you said a little bit early on in the interview, is that a lot of the policy leaders and our elected officials, they don't even realize what's happening on the ground with the population. And I think a big part of that is the fact that they've been so disconnected and put into the Zoom class that they really need to get out of the online, get out of the Zoom, get back to in person. So I know you've outlined a few sectors or systems, as you coined them, that need to get off of Zoom and back to in person. Can you brief us on what that would look like?
Well, you're absolutely right. They must. The country is huge. It's huge. It's regionalized, and people live everywhere. And we're not, unfortunately, smart enough in Canada. No country has people who are sufficiently smart to govern such a big landmass from Zoom rooms or, God forbid, on Twitter. So the main virtue of democracy is not that we're smarter. It is that we can get feedback from the population to correct mistakes. That's the key functional virtue of democracy. Democracy doesn't work if we are elected and just tweet at the population and double down on mistakes because we haven't realized them from the ground. So the key virtue of people getting out there, on top of the energy that we commend in the exit strategy, is to correct mistakes of policy and administration. So in the entire political class, all summer must be traveling all over the country to all corners. I'm for that. The entire civil service, much of Ottawa is still operating on Zoom. Is a scandalously low energy for the biggest country, second biggest country in the world. Out you go across the country, find out what's happening on the ground. You're not sufficiently clever, and nobody is, to make these in the abstract and to commend people what the good life is. Go and correct your mistakes. The same must happen in the business community, in the media community, in the medical community, and by the way, amongst Canadians. They must see their country. And first of all, it's good to reconnect with the physical after 2 years of virtual. A lot of the chaos has been virtual. And secondly, I think it will fall in love with the country again. It's been a very dark period for the country. I've traveled a lot on the ground over the last several months across the country. I've fallen in love again with my country at a time of great darkness in our story. So that is central. Getting out there. Physicians must be in person. All teaching must be in person. We are against hybrid teaching, certainly completely against all online teaching. Maximize the in-person, not as an experience or as a setting. These are all zombie words, but as the standard of living. Of course, virtual space will play for any foreseeable future an important role in our lives, but the physical is where the catastrophes are across the systems.
And that's obviously where we garner the most connection with our fellow human beings. No one can replace that physical touch. We know that humans develop based on having that available to them. Just in closing, I know there is so much to unpack here, so I will link to your full framework in the written component of this report, and we'll show portions, I'm sure, on screen as well. But is there anything that I missed, a key message that you'd like to get across to the Canadian public?
Energy, energy, energy. Nothing happens from tweeting and retweeting. Nothing happens from saying it with more piously. Nothing will happen from just wearing masks and vaccinating. The country is in a state of 8 systems crises. Energy, energy, energy. I'm not talking about the energy of Alberta or petroleum. I'm sympathetic to all that, but that's not what we're talking. We're talking about human energy. Back to the energy we understood in 2019, early 2020. And that much more. The second thing, the final thing I want to leave you with, and I'm sure we'll speak again tomorrow, is on the education thing. The education thing is central. We cannot have a country tomorrow if we've ill-prepared our young. Full stop. Other more clever countries have understood that. We've collapsed education. The schools must never close again, zero. And we must concentrate on the young, whom we've, in my view, betrayed over the last 2 years, and so that they can understand how beautiful our country is and will still be tomorrow.
It's high time that leaders actually start to lead and unwind the general public out of this perpetual state of chaotic fear and panic with high energy and reassurance. But will governments who have been granted sweeping powers over the course of 2+ years ever acknowledge their mistakes and start to right their wrongs? Or will they double down on the rhetoric and continue on this disastrous course that is collapsing our primary systems? For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. One kink that I mentioned in this report is the Tim Hortons Foundation camp, who is still enforcing an outdated vaccine mandate on all of their campers and staff aged 12 and up. I launched a petition against this discriminatory and moot policy at letkidscamp.com. To sign that petition and check out my previous reports on the subject, including when the Tim's camp staff called the police on me instead of receiving the 310-page document, head on over to letkidscamp.com.